Next. Here, well, that's pictures of a middle school competition. Next. Okay, this is a staggering thing. I'm sitting in my office one morning, open up my email, and there's this picture. One of my guys said, it's the guy that I'm also trying to make these little water machines and little generators that will supply electricity and water to the developing world. He was in Ghana, in Africa, looking for a village to help us do an experiment. He said, Dean, I had to pull off the road and use my telephone to take this picture, but there's this sign up about your first competition. He goes into the village and finds out that a couple of engineers from a multinational country that had been mentors every year loved the sport so much they knew January had come. They were giving out the kits. They sent for a kit. They brought the kit to Ghana. They have a team from Ghana. It showed up at the Atlanta event and actually did pretty well. So we are truly international, and we are truly a bottoms-up, volunteer-driven organization. Next. This is some data on these. Next. So we had almost 1,700 high schools this year, 43 cities held events, 11 countries. Next. In the first Lego League, we had 13,705 different schools for teams, 450 events in 42 countries. Next. We had 1,000 teams and 40 events just for our middle school, and it's only a couple of years old. Next. That's the kind of growth most companies was like. Next. More of what? Next. This is, for those of you that think I just drink my own Kool-Aid and like my own program, the Ford Foundation, before they give us any financial support, said, Dean, we need data. We're going to give you a check, and they gave us hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they said, you can't use one penny of it to get one new school. You're going to use this money to go out and do longitudinal studies comparing the impact of FIRST on schools that have the impact on kids of any school that has first team versus an identical school, same situation, whether it's rural or urban, rich or poor, one that does, the one that doesn't. They spent a couple of years collecting data on the impact of FIRST. The following quotes are not me. These are extracted from a 100-page report that the Brandeis University people did for the Ford Foundation, and I will be happy to supply you with the whole report. Let's look at the data. They're 50% more likely, 3 times more likely to major in engineering, 9 times more likely to want internships. They're doing what they see their mentors do, 4 times more likely to pursue careers in engineering, 2.5 times more likely to do volunteer work, because that's what they see going on. Next. A little more data. Among women, a 300% increase in their choice of careers. Among minorities, 150. In the world of education, you get a PhD and a paper written for 3%. We're talking about 3 times, 300%. Next. Oh yes, after about 5 or 6 years of getting more and more companies to sponsor teams, we decided we need the universities to take on the schools, because for one thing, we need their venues to run all of our regionals, and for another, why should we let the universities have access to all these kids we just turned out of high school if they don't participate in creating the next generation? So we started letting universities sponsor teams, and then once they were getting so much out of it, I realized they're getting a free ride compared to the companies. So we now require every university that sponsors a team to give us a full, at least one full 4-year scholarship to give to one of the kids that sits up in those stands. So this is one of my all-time favorite accomplishments. Imagine this. We now have major universities, this year we'll have over 80 of them, giving scholarships to scholars. It's a weird concept, but this is America. Anything can happen. We gave out $11 million in scholarships on the April 15th last year. We're going to give out well over $12 million this year at the finals. Next. This is, I got the last couple of pictures here. This, every year we pick a company that has done something extraordinary to help FIRST. And since BAE has now got well over 100 teams that they supply all the mentors for, they not only support 100 teams, they support about 6 of our 43 regionals. We decided to give this, that's last year's Founders Award, to the CEO of BAE. We announce it, he walks up onto stage in the front of, well, 72,000 seat arena. He looks up and he makes a couple of staggering statements. The first thing he looks up and says is, BAE is not in this for philanthropy. We need these kids more than they need us. When we put a man on the moon in 1969, the average age of an engineer was in his early 20s at NASA. Now the average age of an aerospace engineer in the United States is in their mid-50s. he needs to replace 90,000 engineers in the next 10 years. The next thing he says is, look, this is the only sport I've ever seen where every kid on every team can turn pro. Next slide. I like that line so much, I stole it. And, but I'll give him attribution right here. Now I have my last two pictures, because we had another special guest. So, every year, since he left, I invite former President Bush to come back and see how this thing grew since he was a high school gym in Manchester. Every year since he left, I invite Bill Clinton to come back and see how it's going. Every year we'll invite all the presidents. I hope we get Obama at the finals this year at the Georgia Dome. Anyway, last year, finally after many years, Mr. Bush says he's coming. Well, I didn't tell anybody he's coming because I've come to realize over the years that presidents are incredibly unreliable. World events always get in the way. And I figured, why tell everybody I got a president coming and then they'll all be disappointed. So all day long Friday, the event is going great. We're down to the finals for Saturday morning. And just as he said he would, Saturday morning, 7 o'clock, in the green room, in the Georgia Dome, there's President Bush. So I'm both excited and suddenly terrified. Wait a minute. It's been 15 years since he's seen me first. He's 84 years old. Maybe he'll forget that we're a real sport. It's just real fun. It's not like some science thing. Maybe he'll think it's time for some political speech, and these kids are so jazzed up to go out there and do the finals right after the opening ceremonies and the Star Spangled Banner. So I try to give him a little, like, this president, remember? He starts to laugh. He's being, trust me, I remember first very well. It's unique. It's a great. Anyway, they come in and they say, it's time to go. So we go out in the dark, nobody sees him, comes out behind the stage. I go up on stage and say, wait a minute, everybody, have a special surprise guest before we start the finals. By the way, you gotta remember how fast the world changes, because while we think first is a new and different thing, I realized it's been 16 years since he's been there. The average competitor we have is less than 16. And I realized the kids in this audience weren't even born when we started. And I walk out and I say, how many people are alive in 1991? Well, you know, I said, I have a special guest that really had some vision and some courage to help us get this thing going 16 years ago. And he was the President of the United States. And he's here again to see how we're doing. With that, the President walks onto stage. And everybody's excited. And he, you can imagine, gets fantastic applause. Then he goes up to the podium and pulls out the paper. No good can come from this. He puts the paper down and he starts. And then he looks up. He looks up, and he has like 7 tiers of seats in the 72,000 seat Georgia Dome. He looks up and he goes, wow, this is just like WWF. And the first thing that goes through my mind is, did he have to pick that sport? And the second thing that goes through my mind is, does he watch that stuff? But he says, wow, like WWF. But for smart people. And it brought the house down. He finishes. He gives a great talk. He talks about why it's important to be great at science, technology. He finishes. He leaves. I'm back to, I gotta run through the pits. I gotta thank all my mentors and my sponsors and everybody else involved. And as I run by one of the teams in the pit area, these kids are all very industrious, and they've learned over the years to make all sorts of great gifts that they give to the judges to try to bribe them to win all the great awards that they win. And I go by one of the pits, and a kid hands me the following. Next slide. He hands me this button. It's less than an hour since the president left. He said, first, like WWF, but with smart people. George Herbert Walker Bush, team 1649.